Hi, I'm Carl Niehaus, and this is In My Crosshairs, Conversations with Carl Niehaus. Here I will talk about my own views and also interview thought leaders and political players throughout our country and internationally. You as viewers are invited to participate, to share with each other, to invite other viewers, to register, and of course, all important, hit that notification bell so that you're always part of this important conversation and engagement on our revolutionary journey for a more just and radically transformed South Africa.
Isibongo zika Carl Niehaus. Bangazitha omhlophe kwaundaba ezitha. Inyoni emhlophe kwa njengelanda ephula amaphiwa zamazama umhlaba. Inkanyamba endizele phezulu wanyakazi bhakabhaka ubhangazitha omhlophe kwaundaba ezitha umshawo wathi monopoly capital elanga lishisa babaleka ongqowa kunezise inkulu bacasha patriot labazonina imthandela bethi mahashula kanacala ubhangazitha imthandela bethi FIFA nqamalala ubhangazitha imthandela bethi umnotho nomhlaba ufinyelele ezandleni zabantu abamnyama omhlophe kwaundaba ezitha imthande ngokubusa nokukhuthaza iradical economic transformation wangadibala Carl Niehaus umafele empini njengesotsha uma kade bona eHollywood lesihonga amazi kahle amabhunu bandlulula abaleka abayimbona umbulali wabulala apartheid ngamazwi umthakatho indaba walo mbuso bandlululo kade South Africa yaba kwidemocracy isibhamu esikhumela thule house bathukizana uSirili onondaba bahleka abafayitsini kwemagwalandini la kuyofika khona umkhonto esizwe kuyoqhuma.
Good day. This is Freedom Charter Day. And I want to talk about what the Freedom Charter was meant to be and what it means for us today, what the challenges are for us in this juncture of our history. On the 26th of June, 1965, the leaders of the people, a broad representative movement, met at Kliptown in Soweto. They met there after they've gone through a long and very democratic and representative process of getting inputs from communities throughout South Africa about what they want and how they want to see South Africa to become a truly just, democratic, and non-racial society. I spoke to some of the comrades who were there on the stage at the square in Kliptown. Among them was one of my political mentors, Helen Joseph. They told me how people came with little pieces of paper, with ideas written down about what they want to see in the new South Africa that all of them were prepared to fight for and were hoping for. On those pieces of paper, the people expressed their wish to be part of the South African economy, to own the land, to share in the wealth of the country and the mines, to be able to have equal education, to be able to serve as men and women on an equal basis in our country, to have the basic human rights of shelter, of food, of water, of electricity. These were the things that people spoke about. And they confirmed that ages-old truth, that the people do not fight, as Amilcar Cabral said, for high and falutin political ideals. They care about the real issues, about bread and butter matters. And this is what the Freedom Charter talks about in those 10 clauses. It says the people shall share in the wealth of the country. There shall be equal education for all. That the land shall belong to those who work it. That the mines and the wealth of the country on the soil and underneath the soil will belong to the people. The Freedom Charter is a fundamentally democratic and representative document. It is a document of wealth distribution, and it cares about the empowerment of the majority of Black and especially African people. It cares about reflecting the demographic reality of our country, that the vast majority of South Africans are Black and specifically African. As those 10 clauses were presented, one after the other, that there shall be housing and security for all, free and equal education, that men and women will be treated in an equal way, that the land shall belong to all who work it. One clause after the other was adopted today at the square on Kliptown with acclamation of the representatives of the people throughout the country who gathered there. Today, as we look back at what happened there on the square in Kliptown, which is today known as Walter Sisulu Square, we know that that representative document, which continues to be the expression and the ideal of the hopes of our people, has not yet been implemented. We look with deep concern about the fact that the land does not belong to the people, that a very large part of our population are living in informal settlements without proper housing, that clean water and electricity, basic needs that people have, are still not available to a very large part of our population. We look back at that moment of hope, at that poignant moment of a people's expression of the nation that they want to be. And we say there are in so many ways that we have fallen short. Yes, of course, things are better than what they were before 1994. Yes, of course, we managed to get rid of the worst expressions of racism under the apartheid system. But we have not managed to get rid of racial definition of privilege. In fact, we have not managed to get rid of racism. We have not managed to create a society where the majority of South Africans are in control of our economy and are able to elevate themselves to the commanding heights of this economy. 93% of the shares on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange are still in the hands of mainly white-owned and white monopoly companies. The majority of South Africans have absolutely no say in this economy. They are controlled by this economy. They are laborers. In biblical terms, they're carriers of water and hackers of wood. In the South Africa of the last number of years, unemployment has increased. The basic living conditions of people has deteriorated. More people are living today under the breadline than ever before in the history of our beloved country. More people are today suffering from poverty and the huge gap between the rich and the poor than ever before in this society. Sadly, South Africa continues to be the most unequal society in the world. Sadly, more than 46% of young people have no jobs and have no hope to be able to get a job. Those young people who have benefited from the courageous action that President Jacob Zuma took when he opened the doors of education wider than ever before, when he created the opportunity of free education for the children of the poor. Those young people who've got that education are sitting at home. They do not have jobs. So we have to acknowledge on this Freedom Charter Day, this day which is an expression of the hope of our people. This day where the document that became the foundational document of the economic policy and philosophy of the African National Congress, that we have failed. It doesn't help to say anything else. We have failed. Now, why have we failed? We have failed because we were prepared to make compromises with white monopoly capital. Because when the African National Congress returned from exile, there were those leaders in the ANC who were rather prepared to compromise with white monopoly capitalism than to challenge it and to fundamentally change the economic structure in this country. There were those who were already infiltrated by the agents of imperialism and white monopoly capital into the ANC, even before the African National Congress was unbanned. And sadly, there were many leaders after the unbanning of the ANC who were prepared to sell the future of this country, who were prepared to sell their birthright as Black and African South Africans for the sake of their own self-enrichment. In reality, they sold their birthright for a pot of lentil soup. We have to say also to each other that there were compromises made even by our great president and leader, Comrade Nelson Mandela, that plunged us into this disastrous situation. The decisions that President Mandela took to allow the program of nationalization to be undermined, to embrace an economic policy and philosophy of economic neoliberalism and so-called trickle-down theory, to listen to the white monopoly capitalists who told him that the radical economic transformation of this country, the nationalization of the large industries, the nationalization of the South African Reserve Bank, the restructuring of our financial institutions will lead to a withdrawal of investment and a collapse of this economy. To have allowed himself to be convinced by the white monopoly capitalist captains of industry who walked into his house from morning to evening, who became some of his closest friends, even closer than some of his comrades, to have listened to the Oppenheimers, to the Menels, to the Ruperts. That was one of the worst mistakes and one of the greatest blots on the legacy of President Nelson Mandela. But worse than that are those comrades who sold themselves to white monopoly capitalism, who lapped up the crumbs that were falling from the tables of white monopoly capitalism in order to enrich themselves and their families and their own narrow interests, rather than to look after the interests of the majority of the people, who found it more interesting to sit on the back seats, to quote Chris Hani, of big Mercedes-Benzes and BMWs and even Bentleys and Rolls-Royces than to serve the people, and who today see themselves as the agents and the defenders, in fact, having become the policemen and women of white monopoly capitalism in South Africa. So this is our reality on this 26th of June, 2022. A sad denial of what the Freedom Charter and the expression of the hope of the people that the Freedom Charter manifested is in reality. And what needs to be done? Evident. We need to get rid of the current leadership of the African National Congress. We need to get rid of Cyril Ramaphosa and the National Executive Committee that have sold out. If it is more important to have billion-dollar houses and interests and businesses and million-dollar auctions at your Pala Pala farm, to think that it is more significant to be the president of the Angola Society than to be the president of South Africa, then you need to go. Then your own interests have overtaken the interests of your people. Then your priorities have become topsy-turvy, and you need to go. So for us as a nation, the immediate task ahead of ourselves, if we want to ever have hope that the Freedom Charter will be implemented, is to get rid of Cyril Ramaphosa and the thugs around him. Therefore, the campaign, Ramaphosa must go, is the highest priority that we can work for. Within the African National Congress, those of us who remain committed to the ideals of the Freedom Charter now have to work through the structures of our organization in a very organic and in a democratic way in the branches of the ANC with the grassroots members of the African National Congress to prepare for the ANC's policy conference, which must also be a combined National General Council, to make sure that attempts to remove certain leaders who represent the ideals of the African National Congress historically as they've been expressed in the Freedom Charter and the African Claims of 1948, who continue to believe in the fundamental economic policy program of the ANC, which is radical economic transformation, that any plan to exclude them with farcical and rewritten dictatorial actions to remove them and to force them to step aside, to charge them for farcical cases, as was and is the case with Comrade Ace Magashule, with that so-called keeping him responsible for oversight charge. That all of that must come to an end. That the step-aside resolution must be pushed aside because it is a divisional and factional resolution designed in order to exclude the true revolutionary leaders and representatives of the economic policy program as set out by the Freedom Charter from the African National Congress. And beyond the Policy and National General Council, we need to work for a representative national elective conference that will show the will of the people, that will not be determined by corruption, by the buying of votes, by brown envelopes, by R1 billion or more, as Cyril Ramaphosa did in 2017 at the ANC's 54th National Conference, but by a true representative vote of the people, electing leaders who will represent us, our interests, our hopes, and the ideals as set out in this Freedom Charter of ours that we celebrate today. There continues to be hope, but that flame of hope that also burns there at Walter Sisulu Square in Kliptown in Soweto, that flame of hope will only be kept alive if in this year we make sure that our people's interests and needs, that their futures are being put at the highest and most important desire that we as a nation have. So let us go back to the Freedom Charter. Let us revisit each one of those clauses. Let us make sure that those clauses are implemented as they are expressed in the resolutions of the 54th National Conference of the ANC, those radical economic transformation resolutions. And let us get rid of the sellouts. Cyril Ramaphosa, all the rest of that National Executive Committee of his, who've sold their souls to white monopoly capitalism, must go. The biggest enemy of our people, the enemy that we must fight day and night, is white monopoly capitalism and its agents. So Ramaphosa must go. The National Executive Committee of the African National Congress, as it is constituted now, must go. And a true democratic leadership with the intention to implement the Freedom Charter must replace it. Nothing less. I repeat again, nothing less will suffice. And as always, I conclude this, in my view, message with a slogan that drives us ahead: a luta continua.
Isibongo sika Niehaus. Isibongo sika Niehaus. Inyoni emhlophe eqwa ngelanda ebhula amaphiwa zamazama umhlaba. Inkanyamba endizele phezulu wanyakazi bhakabhaka. Umshawe wathi monopoly capital ilanga lishisa babaleke ongcoba kulezi senkulu baqesha phansi wedaba zonina imthande lapha ethi mahashula kanacala umpangazida imthande lapha ethi viva nqamalala umpangazida imthande lapha ethi umnotho nomhlaba ufinyelele ezandleni zabantu abamnyama umhlophe eqwanda bezitha imthande ngokuhlusa nokukhuthaza iradical economic transformation wangadlike bala Niehaus umafele empinje ngesotsha uma kade bona eHollywood olesihonga amazikahle amabhunu obandlulula yabaleka mayembona umbulali wabulale apartheid ngamazwi.